Imagine being just 18 years old, your heart racing with a blend of excitement and nervous anticipation, convinced you are stepping into a night filled with celebration and new beginnings. You are dressed in the traditional flame-colored wedding veil, the flammeum, its bright saffron hue symbolizing fertility and the sacred fire of Vesta. The soft fabric drapes over your shoulders, but it feels heavier than it should, as though it carries the invisible weight of centuries-old customs. You have been led through the crowded streets of Rome, surrounded by cheering crowds, the air thick with the scent of scattered walnuts and the sound of deliberately crude songs meant to amuse the gods and drive away evil spirits. But now, as the heavy wooden door of your new husband's home slams shut behind you, the festive noise fades, and you find yourself in a dimly lit atrium surrounded by strangers, slaves holding basins of scented water, solemn witnesses in their finest tunics, and a silent physician clutching a leather pouch of instruments. In the corner stands a tall wooden figure, almost completely hidden beneath a thick linen cloth, its presence like an unspoken threat. You were told this was tradition, a sacred rite to honor the gods and complete your marriage. No one mentioned the intimate examination that awaited, the careful documentation of your body, or the real purpose of that shrouded shape. In just a few minutes, the cloth will be lifted, and you will finally understand why your mother's hands trembled while she arranged your hair that morning, why her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. You will realize that this wedding night has nothing to do with love or romance, it is about cold, legal verification. This is not fiction. This was the reality of marriage in ancient Rome, a ritual so disturbing that Roman historians avoided describing it directly, and early Christian writers later tried to erase it entirely from memory. By the time that cloth falls away, young Livia Tersa will confront the harsh truth. Rome wanted the world to forget, and perhaps, after hearing this, you might wish to as well. The year is 89 CE. Emperor Domitian rules Rome with an iron grip, a time when the city's grandeur concealed rigid social hierarchies and uncompromising traditions. 18-year-old Livia Tersa, daughter of a modest but respectable patrician family, is about to discover the two faces of Roman marriage: the public spectacle of saffron veils, joyful songs, and scattered walnuts, and the hidden ceremony conducted behind closed doors in front of people who could one day be called to testify before a magistrate about every detail. Before the shadows of that night closed in, Livia's day had begun like a dream drawn from ancient custom. Early that morning, in her family's home on the Aventine Hill, the first sunlight streamed through narrow windows, bathing the household altar in gold. Her mother, worn by her own long-ago wedding night, rose before dawn to prepare her daughter. With gentle but unsteady hands she parted Livia's dark hair using the tip of an iron spearhead, the Asta Calabaris, symbolizing the shift from maidenhood to wifehood, a reminder of Rome's martial roots. The hair was then carefully divided into 6 braids, each secured with woolen ribbons in auspicious colors, every twist echoing the purity of the Vestal virgins. Livia sat quietly, her mind filled with stories from older sisters and cousins, feasts, dances, the excitement of a new life. Yet beneath the surface a quiet unease stirred. Why did her mother look away when she asked about the night ahead? Why only the cryptic instruction, "Endure with grace"? The procession to the temple was a display of Roman splendor. Livia, veiled in her flammeum, walked between attendants, her white tunic fastened with the knot of Hercules, a belt her husband alone would untie. The streets were packed with well-wishers, children ran alongside, tossing walnuts as symbols of fertility, their clatter meant to drown out malevolent forces. Musicians played flutes and lyres, their melodies blending with rhythmic chants from the crowd. At the temple of Juno, goddess of marriage, the augur performed the sacrifice, a flawless sheep whose entrails were examined for omens. The priest declared the signs favorable, the liver smooth, the heart unblemished. Livia's father, proud and stern, recited the ancient formula transferring her from his legal authority manus to her husband's. She repeated the timeless vow: Ubi tu Gaius, ego Gaia, where you are Gaius, I am Gaia, a declaration of complete surrender, her identity now bound to his. Her groom, Marcus Petronius Rufus, was a wealthy grain merchant from Ostia, 25 years older, his face marked by years of trade voyages and market negotiations. They had met only 3 times. Once at a formal betrothal dinner where his gaze assessed her like fine merchandise, again during the ring exchange, and briefly at the temple steps. He was not cruel, but distant, his world one of ledgers and shipments, hers of household looms and garden herbs. The public rites had begun their union, but in Rome true marriage required more, irrefutable proof that the bond was not merely declared, but physically enacted and verified. As twilight fell, the torchlit procession wound through the city's narrow streets, flames flickering like watchful eyes. The crowds grew louder, their songs turning openly ribald, Fescennine verses filled with explicit detail that made Livia's cheeks burn beneath her veil. Her mother had called them protective charms, but the words stung, hinting at vulnerabilities Livia barely understood. Young men shouted crude suggestions, laughter echoed off stone walls, walnuts pelted her gown, bruising her skin through the fabric. It felt less like blessing and more like mockery. Her mother's final whispered warning rang in her ears: do not resist. Whatever they ask, submit. Resistance only makes it worse. At last they reached Marcus's villa on the Esquiline hill. The doorway was decorated with evergreen wreaths and woolen fillets, blazing torches on either side marking the threshold where the marriage would be consummated according to ancestral law. The singing reached a fever pitch, then fell silent as Marcus lifted her over the step, a gesture rooted in antiquity, recalling a time when brides were taken by force, not courted. The door closed with a heavy thud, shutting out the revelers and sealing Livia inside a world of shadows and scrutiny. In the atrium she saw them, an elderly pronuba, the ceremonial matron overseer, her robes stiff with embroidery, a priest of uncertain affiliation, incense clinging to his cloak, 3 female slaves with lowered eyes, holding ewers of scented water and linens, the physician, an older man with a grave face and glinting instruments, and in the corner, that tall wooden form draped in linen, its outline both familiar and menacing. The pronuba stepped forward and clasped Livia's hands with a grip like iron disguised as guidance. "Welcome to your husband's domain," she said. "The sacred rites must now be fulfilled." Few people today understand what Roman marriage truly was. Not a romantic union, but a calculated legal transaction, similar to the transfer of land or livestock. Under the oldest laws, a wife entered her husband's manus, his absolute control, the same power he held over slaves, even theoretically the right to life and death. By the imperial period, women could own property and seek divorce, but the foundation remained. Marriage transferred a woman from one man's authority to another's. Like any major transfer in Rome, it required verification, witnesses, rituals, divine approval. For land, boundaries were walked and sealed. For marriage, the property was the bride's body, her virginity the asset guaranteeing legitimate heirs. Roman law therefore demanded confirmation, not assumption, but proof of purity and consummation. The rituals designed for that purpose were so intimate and invasive that ancient writers referred to them only in euphemisms or avoided them altogether. Livia stood trembling beside the shrouded figure, the air heavy with lamp smoke and myrrh. The pronuba guided her forward. "You must greet Mutinus Tutinus," she murmured, "and seek his blessing before your husband may approach. The gods require your submission." Livia's pulse pounded. She had never invoked this deity in her household prayers. Her numb fingers grasped the cloth. The room froze, slaves motionless, witnesses leaning closer, even the physician's breath held. As the linen fell away, horror washed over her. Revealed was a wooden phallic idol, carved with deliberate, unsettling anatomical precision. Not a small lucky charm, not a crude garden figure, but an instrument built for one specific ritual purpose. Mutinus Tutinus was Rome's obscure god of bridal initiation and fertility, a figure even pagans mentioned with embarrassment. Centuries later, Christian writers like Augustine condemned the practice with fury. Roman brides were required to sit upon, or mount, the god's emblem before lying with their husbands, in full view of witnesses. The act symbolized, and perhaps physically enacted, the loss of virginity, breaking resistance and demonstrating submission before observers. Ancient sources use verbs implying penetration. Later historians often soften the descriptions, but the original language does not support a purely symbolic interpretation. The pronuba positioned Livia without gentleness, adjusting her stance to ensure the rite was completed. Witnesses watched impassively. Marcus observed, his face a mask of duty. The physician waited in the background, prepared for what came next. In that moment Livia understood her mother's tears, the meaning behind the vulgar songs, the dread that had shadowed the entire day. She could refuse, but refusal meant the marriage would be void. She would return to her father's house not as an honored bride, but as damaged goods, unmarriageable, a source of family shame. So she submitted, the moment searing itself into her memory forever. Afterward slaves bathed her with warmed, perfumed water, chanting prayers of purification, though the real purpose was practical, to prepare her for the physician's examination. He stepped forward and performed an invasive inspection, documenting the physical changes since an earlier pre-marital check. These records could later settle disputes over inheritance, legitimacy, or fidelity. Witnesses affirmed every detail. Their testimony could be demanded in court. To Romans this was routine procedure, no different from surveying a field before purchase. The bride's comfort and emotions were irrelevant, her body was the conduit for lineage, nothing more. At last the pronuba led Livia to the bridal chamber. The bed was positioned for clear visibility from the open doorway, oil lamps burned steadily to ensure nothing was missed. Slaves waited nearby to assist afterward. The entire room felt staged for observation. Marcus entered, hesitating at the threshold, a flush of unease crossing his face, not confidence or desire, but the weight of obligation under watchful eyes. The pronuba spoke formally. The bride is prepared. Let the union be completed according to ancestral custom. Let those present bear witness. Let no doubt remain. The night stretched on, the consummation unfolding slowly and deliberately. The pronuba stood at the doorway, occasionally issuing instructions, correcting postures to meet legal requirements. Sounds carried into the corridor. Privacy was an illusion. For Livia the sheets might as well have been legal parchment, her body the ink Rome demanded to finalize the contract. At dawn the physician returned to confirm that consummation had occurred and that Livia now bore the expected physical signs of a wife. The pronuba gave sworn testimony. Witnesses nodded in acknowledgement. The legal transformation was complete. Livia Tersa was now, officially, a Roman wife. She would live for decades more, bearing children, managing the household, hosting dinners, performing religious duties, and carrying herself with the dignity expected of a matron. To the outside world she appeared composed and respectable, but she never spoke of her wedding night, not even to her daughters, to whom she would one day whisper the same warnings she had received. That silence was not unusual, it was universal. These rites were so deeply woven into the fabric of marriage that describing them seemed unnecessary, like explaining daylight or breathing. That is why historians today struggle to reconstruct what really happened behind closed doors in Roman homes. Much of our knowledge comes from fragments, furious Christian denunciations, scraps of legal commentary, passing references in medical texts, and archaeological clues that only make sense when placed beside those scattered sources. The lack of detailed accounts is not proof of conspiracy, it is proof of how ordinary and accepted these practices were. They were the water Roman women swam in, so omnipresent that explaining them felt pointless. For nearly 1,000 years this was marriage in Rome. Generations of brides walked the same torchlit paths, mothers whispered the same warnings, young women endured the same night of witnesses and scrutiny. The system endured because everyone, men, women, families, priests, accepted its internal logic. Property must be verified, transfers must be witnessed, heirs must be proven legitimate. Women were the vessels through which family lines continued. Within that framework it made sense, even if it feels monstrous to us now. These practices did not end because Rome decided they had gone too far. Change came from outside, through the spread of Christianity and the gradual transformation of Roman values in the 4th and 5th centuries. New theology brought new ideas. If women had souls equal to men's, they could not be treated merely as property. If marriage was a sacred sacrament, it could not include rites the church deemed obscene. If modesty was a virtue, witnesses during consummation became intolerable. The shift was slow, uneven, incomplete, but over time, in cities and elite households, the old ceremonies were abandoned or reshaped beyond recognition. With them went the evidence. Statues of Mutinus Tutinus were smashed or buried, texts were quietly removed from libraries, wall paintings were plastered over, the pronuba's role shrank to a symbolic attendant. The Christians who reshaped Rome were not just erasing embarrassing details, they were building a new civilization on the ruins of the old while refusing to acknowledge what those ruins had once supported. They succeeded almost completely. Today most people picture Roman marriage as a charming blend of saffron veils, festive songs, and scattered walnuts. But fragments always survive. Livia Tersa died around 131 CE, roughly 60 years old, having been a wife for more than 4 decades. She had raised children and fulfilled every expectation placed upon her. But what did she remember? When she thought of her wedding night, did fear, shame, and powerlessness return in quiet moments? Did she eventually find peace with it? Did she hope her daughters would face something gentler? Or did she accept it as simply the way things were? We cannot know. She left no written record. Roman women of her status were not expected to preserve their thoughts. We know what was done to them. We rarely know what they felt. Yet we know enough to understand why generations worked so hard to erase this part of Roman life. Rome is often celebrated as the foundation of Western law, order, and civilization. Acknowledging what it demanded of its women complicates that story. It shows that brutality and refinement can coexist, that legal sophistication can walk hand in hand with systematic dehumanization. The rituals are gone, but the women who endured them were real. For Livia, for her mother, for her daughters, for countless unnamed brides whose wedding nights were ceremonies of control, scrutiny, and verification. They lived, they endured, and they were silenced.